Thank you, James. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be part of this panel. Extremely humbled and privileged to be part of a panel comprising of experts and individuals who are much better versed than I am regarding the legacies of colonialism. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Fun fact, Professor Aisha Jalal was my go-to source of information when I was writing my papers back in university. So it indeed is a massive privilege for me to be part of today's event. So I will just share my screen, James, if that's okay, for my presentation. James, if that's okay. James, if you could enable the sharing screen for participants, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right, so right, there we go. All right, I hope you all can hear me. So in discussing the legacy of colonialism in Bangladesh and much more prominently in the subcontinent, I think there are various layers that one can discuss. But the focus of sort of my presentation will be regarding the lasting effects of colonial legal structures in modern Bangladesh. If we want to start to sort of analyze the history of British imperialism or British colonialism in Bangladesh or Bengal, as it was then, one has to start perhaps at the Battle of Plassey, 1757. A very critical moment in the history of the subcontinent as the British East India Company was victorious against the last Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, and which had an active betrayal of an interesting person by the name of Mir Zafar, who was Siraj-ud-Dowlah's commander-in-chief. And this battle and its victory essentially seized control of the subcontinent, Myanmar, Afghanistan, for the British. And I don't want to delve too much into this again, as this is not my area of expertise. But 1757, again, is a crucial period and time in the history of colonialism, as Bengal was annexed, and it sort of resulted in a larger takeover of the subcontinent, became a focal point in driving an industrial revolution. The region was very wealthy in the in Southeast Asia, and that's sort of where we start thinking about the effects of colonialism. But more specifically, the core of my presentation, as I said, will discuss the lasting effects of the legal structures or legal vehicles that the British left, and sort of discuss how that is still impacting modern independent Bangladesh as of today. So I'm just going to move to the next slide just to give you a brief idea about where Bangladesh stands currently as a country. The British left in 1947. From 1947 to 1971, Bangladesh was part of Pakistan. It's called East Pakistan. In 1971, Bangladesh acquired independence from Pakistan, and this year we celebrated 50 years of an independent Bangladesh. So in this slide, I've sort of given you a rough idea of where we stand from my perspective, at least. Bangladesh is currently a growing economy, a South Asian economic star with rapid GDP growth rates based on textile, agriculture, and remittances. It's sort of like the poster boy of economic growth in certain aspects, referred to by the World Bank, etc., for making credible progress across human development indicators, particularly across health metrics such as maternal mortality rate reductions and infant mortality rate reductions. Due to its geographical position, it is under threat from climate change. And as such, it has had to react as a nation and has become a regional leader in climate resiliency initiatives. And of course, I'm sure some of you might have heard about organizations such as Grameen Bank and BRAC, leading NGOs and sort of focal points of community-based entrepreneurism in the region, and an example to the world for instruments such as microcredit. So Bangladesh has indeed come a long way, undeniably, as a nation which is making progress. But again, there are concerns that remain ever present even today, and those concerns have their roots in colonialism, interestingly, and I'll go over that in details. So increasingly over the past 10 to 12 years, Bangladesh has witnessed an increasingly authoritarian political trend. You see lack of democratic activities and an increasingly controversial role for law enforcement agencies. The two most recent general elections were highly contested and criticized by international organizations. And that has also simultaneously led to a situation where press and social media freedom has been curtailed, and you are seeing growing human rights concerns. There are the other aspects of the economic journey and the path taken to development, such as an education system which still remains extremely colonial in nature, from how the syllabus and syllabi are constructed for primary and secondary education levels, as well as how examinations are undertaken. And of course, interestingly, Bangladesh now has the second highest growth of millionaires in the last year or so, which increasingly shows a level of inequality which is deeply concerning. So that's where Bangladesh stands as of right now as a country, if I am to put it briefly. And moving forward, as I mentioned, one of the primary concerns from a broader lens is in the state of democracy in the country as of right now, and the lack of democratic activities in the past 10 years or so. And I think the most prominent vehicle that the state or state based organizations and institutions have used or tapped into has been something called the Digital Security Act. The Digital Security Act is based on a colonial era Official Secrets Act. And the crux of it is this: you have a tool, a legal vehicle by which freedom of expression, freedom of free speech, and the freedom to talk essentially is being curtailed by law enforcement agencies. It has been used as a vehicle to curb dissent and democratic activities, similar, if not the same, as to how colonial regimes used the Official Secrets Act back in the 19th century. Just to give you some context, Parliament passed the Digital Security Act in September 2018. And what it did was it combined the colonial era Official Secrets Act with a new provisions such as arrests without a warrant. So interestingly and sadly, in fact, since 2019, the country has witnessed an increasing use of the DSA to curb dissent and to sort of arrest individuals, try individuals who have been vocal against issues that they have seen develop, and issues which they have, which people have raised concern against with respect to government decisions. In 2019, we saw 63 cases being lodged against journalists and particularly so-called free thinkers. 2020, the numbers went up. And 2021, at the heart of the pandemic, we increasingly saw individuals being arrested by leveraging the DSA. Prominent photojournalists such as Kajol, who depicted stories of corruption on mainstream newspapers, and senior writer Mushtaq Ahmed, in fact, died in prison while being arrested under what specialists and legal scholars are calling one of the last remaining remnants of the colonial era Official Secrets Act. So the point that I want to sort of focus on is this. The legacy of British colonial laws remain ever present in Bangladeshi society. Most notably and most recently, it was mobilized in 2018 via the development of the Digital Security Act. And such has raised immense concern across Bangladeshi society and across the legal community. Now, sort of the philosophical roots of the Digital Security Act, as I said, lies in something called the Official Secrets Act 1923, which was formulated in the colonial era in order to prevent what the British considered spying against the state, so what we call anti-state activities. But the Bangladeshi Constitution of 1972 guarantees freedom of expression as the fundamental right, and the Constitution is crafted in a way that fundamental rights supersede any and all laws of the land. Therefore, there is an increasing and growing movement amongst journalists in particular and individuals who are working in human rights organizations to mobilize a campaign against the political authority to rescind the Digital Security Act because of how colonial and how aggressive it is as a vehicle against democracy. And moving forward, I'd just like to give you a quick example. Rosina Islam is a senior journalist in Bangladesh. She writes for a paper, and she is an investigative journalist for a paper called Prothom Alo. In 2021, at the heart of the pandemic, she was investigating corruption in the health ministry. And on launching one of her investigations, she had visited an office, a department office in Dhaka city. And she had sort of found out about massive levels of corruption undertaken by health ministry officials, which were later presented to the public. But in that very moment, she was arrested without a warrant, and she was arrested under the Official Secrets Act. Ultimately, Rosina Islam was released, but this was the first time in almost 35 years that the Official Secrets Act was actually used by the government of Bangladesh against an individual or citizen. And this remains a sad remnant of our colonial past. Moving forwards, as I said, democracy being in danger has also been associated with an increasing role of law enforcement agencies and the police in Bangladesh. Human Rights Watch has reported multiple, if not hundreds of cases. In fact, 572 people in Bangladesh in the last 11 years have been forcibly disappeared by the security forces and law enforcement agencies, who have often tapped into colonial era legal structures and rules to again arrest people without warrants and engage in something that the law enforcement agencies call crossfires or encounters between individuals. And of course, you have seen an increasing role of a secret police force called the Rapid Action Battalion, again, extremely, extremely undemocratic, as Human Rights Watch has said, and along with other organizations. The basis of criminal justice laws in Bangladesh is the 1860 Penal Code. Again, just to give you an example, the 1860 Penal Code basically dictates, for example, according to one of its sections, the definition of rape. And up until last year, marital rape was not considered rape, which resulted in a lot of victims not being able to access judicial services and get the kind of justice that they were looking for. This remains an issue of contention because we have not, as a country, defined rape in a manner consistent with providing justice to the victims for the last 150 years. That's just one aspect of it. And again, as I said, the punishment for being a rapist in the eyes of the law was imprisonment for 10 years. That is being looked at right now. In fact, I think the government of Bangladesh has worked with legal scholars to ensure that sections of the 1860 Penal Code are addressed, but you could see that a major portion of how law enforcement agencies act in the country is still based on colonial era rules, which are outdated and have been deemed draconian in nature. And in a nutshell, that is where we stand. The legacy of British colonization is multifold in Bangladesh, but in my perspective, in my experience, and in my personal research as a columnist, what I've seen increasingly is the mobilization of colonial era rules and laws and legal vehicles which are being used to clamp down on dissent and are acting against the very principles of democracy that the country sort of tried to institutionalize over the last 50 years. It has been used by the state and by political actors as a means to ensure that they remain in power, unfortunately, and it is a trend that has remained present across different political regimes, not simply the current political regime. And there is a growing movement in Bangladesh for people to understand, reflect on the legacies of colonial laws, and as such, address them head on immediately. The last point that I would like to make on a lighter note is one of the things that the British did was inspire our artists and intellectuals to come together in a way to form sort of an anti-colonist movement in Bangladesh and Bengal. This was unique because artists and cultural icons undertook what we now call the Bengal Renaissance, radical transformation of subcontinental society, mobilized by poets and writers. And the reason I say this even today is that the individuals you see on the slide, or to the left, you will see Rabindranath Tagore, iconic literary figure, received the knighthood from the British Empire, rejected it because he was an anti-colonialist. We can go into a discussion regarding that some other day. But at the same time, also received the Nobel Prize for Literature. Qazi Nazrul Islam, national poet of Bangladesh, again, their songs and their poems remain ever constant in Bengali society even today. And a massive component of the work they did was their sort of vision for a free and independent subcontinent, in the sense that one that respects our culture, our rules, and our mediums of operation, are not be under the whims of colonialist forces. So again, the legacy of Bangladesh, the legacy of colonialism when it comes to Bangladesh is perhaps rooted in our legal sort of trajectory that the nation has taken over the past 50 years. The very constitution of the country is based on common law, and what British common law, and a large component of the criminal justice rules and regulations are based on the 1860 Penal Code and broader legislative and legal tools used by colonialist forces. And that remains a cause of concern, not simply for me, but for those people in Bangladesh who want to see democracy flourish. I believe the other speakers will talk about more important components such as the Bengal famine. I know Professor Aisha Jalal has done a lot of work on this, and I followed her over the last 5 or 6 years, and I think she can give us better context regarding partition, etc. But yeah, so that was me, and thank you for